Right, Luke, we are on camera. So quick hello. That's my boy right there. He's the guy who takes charge.
Turn left onto Brentfield Road.
And lets me know what I need to be doing. I'm just a driver. Right, so.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, continue straight to stay on Brentfield Road.
And I want to clarify a few things. And me and Luke are going to have a little conversation. He's a lot younger than I am, about 20 years younger than me. So it's a different generation, really. So it would be nice to have a little bit of insight into what Luke thinks about the current situation.
Continue on North Circular Road for 2 miles.
Talking about English people, and I said you have to understand English people. Like when I grew up, I was born in 1980, and I was telling Luke yesterday, when I was young, I had a lot of identity issues. I didn't know what to identify with, what side of my personality, or what side of my growing up that I wanted to embrace. Was I going to embrace the English side? Was I going to embrace the Indian side? And I remember being quite embarrassed, to be honest with you. Like when my grandma and things would pick me up from school, or I'd go out with my grandparents, because my grandparents were outwardly Indian. You know, my grandma wore a sari, she had a chanlo on her forehead. And when I was young, Asians weren't exactly cool, right?
There's 6-minute congestion on A40 in 2 miles. You are still on the fastest route.
Be like. It was the white fellas, or the black fellas that everyone wanted to be like. Those were the popular people in society. Those were the athletes. Those were the musicians, right? So when I was growing up, it was the geezers, in my area who were kind of cool. Those were the ones who I identified with. I was never, even though I went to private schools when I was young, not because I was particularly intelligent, but my parents wanted a good education for their son, and they were willing to invest. And back then, there were a lot of Asian families who were coming up, doing well, and who could afford to spend thousands and thousands of pounds to send their kids to school. And by proxy, or by osmosis, I picked up a lot of things in those schools that helped me later on in life, in terms of education, in terms of how articulate a person can be when they're trying to express themselves. I'm glad I went, but it was never me. It was never me. I was never that person. I was never a haberdashery. I was never a Carthusian, right? I was never inwardly.
In a quarter of a mile, use the left 2 lanes to turn slightly left onto Western Avenue.
Into haberdashery. Yes, I'm highly educated. I was just that just wasn't me from the beginning. I never embraced education when I was young. Never did. Maybe that's why I'm a truck driver now. I never embraced it, but I did educate myself. Anyway, we're going a bit off topic here. So we're talking about racism, identity issues. So when I was young, like I said, I identified with the people who I thought were cool, right? Most of the time, they were the white fellas living in my area at the time. A bit of the geezers, and we used to grow up watching, things like Only Fools, bit of Harry Enfield and Chums, and that wasn't considered racist. That wasn't something that you couldn't show on telly because people would get offended. But Harry Enfield and Chums are no longer on TV, right? Only Fools and Horses didn't cross any real barriers, and it was quite inclusive. Hence the reason why it's still shown on telly, on channels like Gold.
Use the left 2 lanes to turn slightly left onto Western Avenue.
Right? You can't see Harry Enfield and Chums, and if you want to see it, you got to go onto YouTube, because the
continue for 3 miles.
Back then is just not. It's not acceptable anymore, right? And that Cockney type of humour is now been sort of lumped in with all the EDL racist. Just because somebody sounds that way doesn't automatically make them a racist. Now, back in the day, maybe it was those type of people, skinhead type of people, who were calling me a packy and a curry muncher and all the rest of it, right? So maybe it was, but it didn't turn me off those people, because I know that there were decent other people that existed who had sounded the bloody same, right? So it's all about perspective, and it's all about your experiences. I get along with the English well, yeah, because I'm English, right? I grew up here. I grew up in London, right? I was born in Harrow. I grew up in Wembley, right? I was knocking about the streets in the 80s and 90s. I was going into town on a £1.50 a day child travel card, right? £1.50 a day it was back then. So, you know, I don't really look at the way things are right now and think to myself that we've moved forward. I really don't. I look at the way things are now and how everyone needs to be inclusive. Oh, we need a black James Bond, right? Why can't he be black? He's not black, right? James Bond is never going to be a black man, right? He can be, or if you're black and you want to imagine you're James Bond, then imagine it. But, you know, James Bond's white, right? We don't need, when I was young, I didn't need Indians to be on the telly, right? Because I wanted everyone to be included. Nowadays, there are Indians on the telly. Do you know why there are Indians on the telly nowadays? Because they bloody earned it. That's why, right? There might be funny Indians now. There might be clever Indians, right, who have got into high positions in the government, right? Hence the reason why they're there. They earned that, right? Recently, I was reading about J.K. Rowling, and she had said something about you know, people wanting to, or people. Or anyone that mentions...
Turn left onto Western Avenue, A40.
Right, something along those lines. And so all the LGBT people...
Continue on A40 for 3 miles.
Because, you know, she had said something, I don't know, that was derogatory towards LGBT. Now, another thing I read about with J.K. Rowling was that in her books, she referred to a lot of the kids... well, she tried
in 100 yards, use the left lane to turn sharp right onto Western Avenue, A40.
Right? And she tried to include a Chinese. And the Chinese girl, her name was Cho Chang. Right? And a lot of Chinese people got pissed off. Because why are you calling her Cho Chang? Why are you combining Korean and Chinese? Right? And why is she in the Slytherin house? Why was she a snitch in the book? Why couldn't she have been a clever person? Right?
Use the left lane to turn sharp right onto Western Avenue, A40, then turn left onto Western Avenue.
Who cares? Alright? She called her Cho Chang. Right? My name's Lamont. My last name's Patel. So she...
Turn left onto Western Avenue, then turn left onto Alliance Road.
Right?
Continue on A40 for 3 miles.
An Indian name of Patil. Patil. P-A-T-I-L instead of E-L. Okay? So, when I was reading the book, reading the book, because I have read books 1 through 5 actually, haven't read 6 and 7, got tired of it after 1 through 5, but yeah, she included Patil, and I didn't read into it and say, oh, you know, not representing Asians very well, are they, Luke? Right? They're not representing Asians. Yeah, but I didn't get annoyed, right? Because here you have a white woman, okay, all right, a very well-to-do English white woman who probably harks back to the days when she imagined all these lovely white children making magical potions and waving around their wands and flying on broomsticks, right? And maybe in her mind, she imagined that they were all white. So what? She's English. It's her bloody right to imagine. And she's not even young. So it's not like she grew up in a time when all the people, or grew up in London and was going to school in Wembley, and it was a mix of Somalis and blacks and whites and Poles and Romanians and everything. So we have to include. J.K. Rowling probably grew up in a time when there was all, and probably went to a school where it was all white people, you know? So maybe that's what she dreamed of her book. Why change her dream? Why change her dream? That's what she wanted. That's what she dreamed of her book being. She probably included the Patels and the Changs, just so that, because she maybe realised that the book had become extremely popular after book 1, and then realised I've got to be inclusive, right? So I've got to include these people more. So she included a black fella, she included a Chinese, she included, right? And I can understand that, because at the end of the day, it's a money-making operation, right? She realised there was billions to be made, and so she decided to be inclusive to keep everyone happy. But if she wasn't inclusive enough, and if she represented, or she didn't represent, your ethnic minority group in the way that you want them to, so what? Why are you getting your knickers in twists? Why? It's her book, yeah? And she wanted the book to have white people in it, and it was an all-white cast, all white people. So what? Yeah, if you're an Indian person that wants to be a bloody magician, right, or imagined yourself being a magician, then imagine yourself in the book being Harry Potter. I can't imagine why you want to do that, but you know, that's what you got to do. You got to imagine yourself being Harry Potter, right? But you don't need to demand that the author include, right, Asians and Chinese and blacks in the proper way. Who cares, mate? Use your imagination. Grow up, right? It's ridiculous. And going back to the whole racist thing yesterday, Luke, I want to ask you something, yeah? Remember I was talking about that racism yesterday, yeah?
Yeah.
So I was saying, I had written on Facebook, yeah, that you need to understand English people. Like when I was young, yeah, I used to be at the sort of joking end of a lot of these racist jokes. Yeah. And I found it quite disturbing, especially when people were doing it and they really meant it. Like if somebody called me a Paki or curry muncher on the street or pissed on me. I remember a white girl, she was, I told you about the story, remember? Yeah. She said I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. I was playing cricket in the front garden, and this girl from the estate next door, you know, comes over and sticks her tongue out at me, and she's been eating blackjacks and says I've been sucking on black man's willy, right? And I was horrified by that. I was horrified by that when I was young. Because she just stuck her tongue out and she was like, you know, and I was just thinking to myself, what kind of person is this, you know? I lost my train of thought there. So yeah, so basically we were talking about racism, and I was saying you got to understand the English. Now back then that person was being actually racist at that time, right? I grew up with a lot of racist jokes. I was at the joking end of a lot of those jokes, and sometimes people were being wankers about it, and then they got told, because you have to have the courage to speak up. You have to have the courage to tell people that you don't like what they're saying, or if need be, even get into a physical altercation if need be. That's the way I look at it. Somebody comes up to me and starts calling me a Paki or a dot head or something in the middle of the road, I might not be the type of person to stand there and take it, right? I might say, well, you know, get your twins up. It's see who the Paki is at the end of the day. You're going to about to get beaten up by a Paki, right? So it doesn't, you know. I was at the receiving end of a lot of that racism, but I also did a lot of racist jokes when I was young, heard a lot of racist jokes and found them funny because I wasn't at the receiving end. And oh, another thing, white people are the best at making jokes anyway, yeah? White people are the best at making racist jokes, and they are funny. I'm sorry, it has to be said. There are so many racist jokes out there, and And racist banter is absolutely hilarious, because we laugh at our stereotypes that the society has created. We know they aren't true, or at least I do. Intelligent people do. Intelligent people understand that these jokes aren't actually true, but they're so ridiculous and they're so shameful sometimes that they're funny. Why can't you get that? Why can't people get that? I don't know. Because you're soft. That's what you are. You're soft, and you need to be protected. You need your little bubble to be protected, or you need to grow up, mate. Okay? That's not what. There are a lot of people out there, right, who think the way that I do, yeah, but they're just not saying it. And they're harking back to a time when Britain was a lot more open. And maybe it was a little bit more white. Maybe it was a hell of a lot more white, and everything was kind of like this decided by white people or whatever. But it was a good time. It was a good time. It was a time when we could say a lot. It was a time when you didn't have a bunch of pussified leftists, basically, who find everything to be fascist. Yeah, you can't say anything without being a fascist. And you know, those were good times in my opinion, and I don't mind saying that. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm not. Everybody who's seen my videos, everybody who's seen my posts in the last few years knows that I'm not ashamed, right? I speak my mind, I say my opinions, right? And I don't care. I stand by those opinions, right? That's just the kind of person that I am. And I just want to say a message to all the English people out there. You know, all the ones who are lumped in with the EDL, all the ones who are lumped in racist. You know, there is a legitimate reason sometimes to be worried about the future of your country. Now, and there is nothing wrong, okay, if I was a white person. Oh, this is a really important point I want to make. If I was a white person, or do you know why I looked up to English people when I was young? Because coming from an Indian family and coming from a Gujarati family, okay, we didn't have a lot of hard bastards in our community, and that's something that I always kind of liked when I was young. I was into action films. I started getting into weight training, right? And I liked that sort of thing. I liked, I myself went through a lot of, just when I had to scrap when I was young. I had to go to do that sort of stuff. So I needed to develop a certain spine, which sometimes people nowadays don't have, right? And the reason why I looked up to English people was because I realised when I was young the history of this country and what the country has achieved, how they were able to rule the planet. And I'm not going to say that was a good thing, but it was definitely an achievement to rule the entire planet, or 2/3 of the planet, from this tiny little island, and having stations where there may be a couple of hundred people making the decisions for the entire region, somewhere thousands of miles away, right? That is an impressive achievement. They enacted laws, they built train stations, they done all sorts, and those laws are still being used, and the countries who are being governed by those laws are still using those laws today. It's formed the basis of the legal systems for many countries around the world. It's created the infrastructure and the railways so that the economy can grow. It's connected the major ports and cities. Who did that? In many cases, it was the Brits. It was the Brits. Why do you think English people are proud? Because they've achieved a lot. There's nothing wrong with flying the St. George's flag and being proud. Okay? And I know that their capital city, and I'm not going to say it's anything wrong. We need immigrants in this country, but there's a lot that's come through. Okay? And there are a lot of people who I know who are English, who possibly grew up in places like Colindale, who grew up in Wembley, who grew up in East London, and who are looking at those places now and just saying to themselves, that's not my home anymore. It's not my home anymore. Why is it not my home anymore? Because it doesn't look or feel anything like it did when I was young, right? I'm not talking about me, I'm putting myself in the shoes of an Englishman, right? And I don't.
In a quarter of a mile, keep
I
right
don't
to continue
blame
on
them
Westway,
for feeling
A40.
that way, but they have to accept that times have moved on, and we have to take pinches of realities from when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, and we have to combine.
Keep right
that
to continue
with
on
realities
Westway.
that have been created in the 2000s and the 2010s to create the best possible society. So if
Continue
things
for
that we
3
were doing
miles.
well back then, we need to say, you know what, things were better back then. We're gonna use that. We're gonna be like that. We're gonna defend that, and we're not gonna use the things that have developed in the last 10 years or 5 years. Certain things we're not going to defend because we think it's stupid. What's wrong with that? Defend what's good from the past, and antiquate or obliterate what's bad. Simple, very simple. That's my philosophy. Use what's good, throw away what's bad, right? And make it a melee of different ideas from different times, things that work, things that have relevance in today's world. And it's through comedy and through these type of racist jokes where we mock old institutions and old ways of living. We mock them, right? And why do we